Solidarity, comrades. Today, as you would guess from the title, we are reading the very famous interview that was put into a written format by Stalin called Marxism versus Liberalism. An interview with H.G. Wells. There's Uncle Stalin smoking this pipe. All right, so let's get started. J.V. Stalin, Marxism versus Liberalism, an interview with H.G. Wells, 23rd July, 1934. Wells says, "I'm very much obliged to you, Mr. Stalin, for agreeing to see me. I was in the United States recently. I had a long conversation with President Roosevelt and tried to ascertain what his leading ideas were. Now I've come to ask you, what are you doing to change the world?" Stalin replies, "Not so very much." Wells, "I wander around the world as a common man, and as a common man observe what is going on around me." Stalin, "Important public men like yourself are not common men. Of course, history alone can show how important this or that public man has been. At all events, you do not look at the world as a common man." Wells, "I'm not pretending humility. What I mean is that I try to see the world through the eyes of the common man, not as a party politician or a responsible administrator. My visit to the United States excited my mind. The old financial world is collapsing. The economic life of the country is being reorganized on the lines Lenin said. We must learn to do business, learn from this and the capitalists. Today, capitalists have to learn from you to grasp the spirit of socialism. It seems to me that what is taking place in the United States is a profound reorganization, the creation of plan that is socialist economy. You and Roosevelt begin from two different starting points, but there is not a relation in ideas, a kingship of ideas between Moscow and Washington. In Washington, I was struck by the same thing I see going on here. They are building offices and are creating a number of state regulation bodies. They are organizing long-needed civil services. Their need, like yours, is directive ability." Stalin replies, "The United States is pursuing a different aim from which we are pursuing in the USSR. The aim the Americans are pursuing arose out of economic troubles, out of the economic crisis. The Americans want to rid themselves of the crisis on the basis of private capitalist activity, without the changing of economic basis. They are trying to reduce to a minimum the ruin, the losses caused by existing economic system. Here, however, as you know, in place of the old destroyed economic basis, an entirely different, a new economic basis has been created. Even if the Americans you mentioned partly achieve their aim, in other words, reduce the losses to a minimum, they will not destroy the roots of the anarchy which is inherent in the existing capitalist system. They are preserving the economic system which must inevitably lead, but cannot lead to anarchy and production. Thus, at best, it will be a matter not of reorganization of society, not of abolishing the old social system which gives rise to anarchy and crisis, but of restricting certain of its excesses. Subjectively, perhaps, these Americans think they are reorganizing society. That is why, objectively, there will be no reorganization of society. Nor will there be a planned economy. What is planned economy? What are some of its attributes? Planned economy tries to abolish unemployment, Let us suppose it is possible, while preserving the capitalist system, to reduce unemployment to a certain minimum. But surely no capitalist would ever agree to the complete abolition of unemployment, to the abolition of the reserve army of unemployed, the purpose of which is to bring pressure on the labor market to ensure a supply of cheap labor. Here you have one of the rents in the planned economy, quote unquote, of the bourgeois society. Furthermore, planned economy presupposes increased output in those branches of industry which produce goods that the masses of the people need particularly. But you know that the expansion of production under capitalism takes place for entirely different motives. The capital flows into the branches of the economy in which the rate of profit is highest. You will never compel a capitalist to incur loss to him or herself and agree to a lower rate of profit for sake of satisfying the needs of the people. Without getting rid of the capitalist, without abolishing the principle of private property in the means of production, it is impossible to create a planned economy. Wells is about to reply. I'm going to get into a more comfortable space. Comfortable position. Try. Because this is longer than I thought it was going to be. Okay, let's get it started. Wells. Wells replies, I agree with much of what you have said, but I would like to stress the point that if a country as a whole adopts the principle of a planned economy, if the government gradually, step by step, begins consistently to apply this principle, the financial oligarchy will be at last abolished, and socialism of the Anglo-Saxon meaning of the word will be brought about. She was fairly ignorant. The effect of the ideas of Roosevelt's New Deal is most powerful, and in my opinion, they are socialist ideas. It seems to me that instead of stressing the antagonisms between the two worlds, we should, in the present circumstances, try to establish a common tongue for constructive forces. Stalin replies, in speaking of the impossibility of realizing the principles of planned economy while preserving an economic basis of capitalism, I do not in the least desire to belittle the outstanding personal qualities of Roosevelt, his initiative, courage, and determination. Undoubtedly, Roosevelt stands out as one of the strongest figures among all captains of the contemporary capitalist world. That is why I would like once again to emphasize the point under my conviction that planned economy is impossible under the conditions of capitalism. Does not mean that I have any doubts about personal abilities, talent, or courage of President Roosevelt. But if the circumstances are unfavorable, the most talented captain cannot reach the goal you refer to. Theoretically, of course, the possibility of marching gradually step by step under the conditions of capitalism towards the goal of which you call socialism in the Anglo-Saxon meaning of the world is not precluded. Socialism in the Anglo-Saxon meaning of the world is social democracy. That was my insertion. Sorry, Stalin. But what will this quote-unquote socialism be? At best, bridling to some extent, the most unbridled of individual representatives of capitalist profit, some increase in the application of the principle of regulation in international economy. That is all very well. But as soon as Roosevelt or any other captain of the contemporary bourgeoisie world proceeds to undertake something serious against the foundations of capitalism, he will inevitably suffer defeat. The banks of the industries, the large enterprises, the large farms are not in Roosevelt's hands. All these are private property. The railroads, the mercantile fleet, all these belong to private owners. And finally, the army of skilled workers, the engineers, the technicians, these are not at Roosevelt's command. They are at the command of the private owners. They all work for private owners. We must not forget the functions of the state in the bourgeois world. The state is an institution that organizes the defense of a country's of the country, organize the maintenance of order. It is an apparatus for collecting taxes. The capitalist state does not deal much with the economy in the strict sense of the word. The latter is not in the hands of the state. On the contrary, the state is in the hands of the capitalist economy. That is why I fear that in spite of all his energies and abilities, Roosevelt will not achieve the goal you mentioned, if indeed that is his goal. Perhaps in the course of several generations it will be possible to approach this goal somewhat, but I personally think the event is not very probable. Wells replies, perhaps I believe more strongly in the economic interpretations of politics than you do. Huge forces driving towards better organization for the better functioning of the community. That is for socialism. Having brought into action by invention and modern science, organization and the regulation of individual action have become mechanical necessities, irrespective of social theories. If we begin with the state control of banks, then we follow with the control of transport, of heavy industries, of industry in general, commerce, and etc. Such as an all-embracing control will be equivalent to state ownership of all branches, national economy. This will be the process of socialization. Socialism and individualism are not opposites, like black and white. There are many intermediate stages between them. There is individualism that borders on brigandage, and there's discipline and organization that are equivalent to socialism. The introduction of planned economy depends to a large degree upon the organizers of the economy, upon the skilled technical intelligentsia who step by step can be converted to the socialist principles of organization. And the most important thing, because organization comes before socialism, the more important fact, without organization, the socialist idea is a mere idea. This statement right here shows that he has no scientific understanding or any understanding of politics outside of what he has heard. There's no scientific basis in what he says. And he has no understanding of Marxism. That's obvious, especially with his statement on individualism and socialism, not understanding that socialism and individualism are antagonistic contradictions. Anyway, Stalin replies, there is no, nor should there be, irreconcilable contrast between individual and the collective, between the interests of the individual person and the interests of the collective. There should be no such contrast, because collectivism, socialism, does not deny but combines individual interests with the interests of the collective. Socialism cannot abstract itself from the individual interests. Socialist society alone can most fully satisfy these personal interests. More than that, socialist society alone can firmly safeguard the interests of the individual. In this sense, there is no irreconcilable contrast between individualism and socialism. But class, the capitalist class, and the toiling class, the proletarian class, on one hand, we have the property class, which owns the banks, the factories, the mines, the transports, the plantations, in colonies. People see nothing but their own interests. They're striving after profits, but they do not submit the will of the collective. They strive to subordinate every collective of their will. On the other hand, we have the class of the poor and exploited class, which owns neither factories nor works nor banks, which is compelled to live by selling its labor to the capitalists, which lacks the opportunity to satisfy the most elementary requirements. How can such opposite interests and strivings be reconciled? As far as I know, Roosevelt has not succeeded in finding a path of conciliation between those interests, and it is impossible, as experience has shown. Incidentally, you know the situation in the United States better than I do, as I have never been there, and I watch American affairs mainly from literature. But I have some experience in fighting for socialism. and the experience tells me that Roosevelt makes a real attempt to satisfy the interests of the proletarian class at the expense of the capitalist class. The latter will put another president in this place. The capitalists will say presidents come and presidents go, but we go on forever. This is what president does not. This or that president does not protect our interests. We shall find another. That's what the capitalists say. What can the president oppose to the will of the capitalist class? This is so true in a bourgeois society. Wells replies, I object to the simplification of classification of mankind into poor and rich, not understanding Marxist class struggle. What an idiot. Anyway, Wells is an idiot. And mankind into poor and rich. Of course, there's a category of people which strive only for profit, but these are people regarded as nuisances in the West, just as much as here. Are there not plenty of people in the West from whom profit is not an end, who own a certain amount of wealth but invest and obtain profit from investment, who do not regard this as the main object? They regard investment as an inconvenient necessity. There are not plenty of capable, devoted engineers, organizers of economy whose activities are stimulated by something other than profit. In my opinion, there are numerous class-capable people who admit the present system is unsatisfactory, who are destined to play a great role in future socialist society. During the past few years, I have been much engaged, and I have thought the need for conducting propaganda in favor of socialism and cosmopolitanism among wide circles of engineers, airmen, military, technical people, etc. It is useless to approach these circles with a two-track class war propaganda. These people understand the conditions of the world. They understand that it is a bloody muddle, but they regard your simple class antagonism as nonsense. Someone who doesn't understand the science of dialectical materialism. She wasn't an idiot. Stalin, you object to the simplification of classification of... Stalin says, you object to the simplification of classification of mankind into rich and poor. Of course there is a middle stratum. There is a technical intelligentsia that you have mentioned, amongst which there are very good and very honest people. Among them are also dishonest and wicked people. There are all sorts of people among them. But first, all mankind is divided into rich and poor, into property owners and exploited. To abstract oneself from this fundamental division and from antagonism between poor and rich means abstracting oneself from the fundamental fact. I do not deny the existence of intermediate middle strata, which either take the side of one or the other. These two conflicting classes, or else take up a neutral or semi-neutral position in this struggle. But I repeat, to abstract oneself from this fundamental division in society and from the fundamental struggle, the two main classes, means ignoring facts. The struggle is going on and will continue. The outcome will be determined by the proletarian class, the working class. Wells. But are there not many people who are not poor who work and work productively? Stalin, of course. There are small landowners, artisans, small traders, but it is not these people who decide the fate of the country, but the toiling masses who produce all things society requires. Wells, but there are very different kinds of capitalists. There are capitalists who only think about profit and getting rich. But there are also those who are prepared to make sacrifices. Take old Morgan, for example. J.P. Morgan. He only thought about profit. He was a parasite on society. Simply, he merely accumulated wealth. But Rockefeller, he's praising Rockefeller, putting him in the same breath as socialism. He is a brilliant organizer. He is an example how to organize delivery of oil is worthy of emulation. Or take Ford, a fascist who was friends with Adolf Hitler. Of course, Ford is selfish, but he is not a passion. But is he not a passionate organizer of rationalized production of whom you take lessons? He's also a passionate fascist. These are my anecdotes. I would like to emphasize the fact that you recently an important change in your opinion towards the USSR has taken place in English-speaking countries. The reason for this, first of all, is the position of Japan in the events in Germany. But there are other reasons behind from international politics. There is a more profound reason, namely the recognition by many people of the fact that the system based on private profit is breaking down. Under these circumstances, it seems to me we must not bring to the forefront antagonisms between two worlds. This is basic science, H.G. Wells. But should strive to combine all the constructive movements. Class collaboration. Does that sound like fascism to you? All constructive forces in one line as much as possible. You are a class collaborator. It seems to me that I am more to the left than you, Mr. Stalin. I think the old system is nearer to its end than you think. Oh my God, he said he was more left than Stalin after calling Rockefeller a socialist. Holy shit. This is 1937. Stalin replies, and speaking of capitalists who strive only for profit, only to get rich, I do not want to say that these are the most worthless people capable of nothing else. Many of them undoubtedly possess great organizing talent, which I do not dream of denying. We Soviet people learn a great deal from the capitalists. And Morgan, whom you characterize so unfavorably, was undoubtedly a good, capable organizer. But if you mean people are prepared to reconstruct the world, of course, you will not be able to find them in the ranks of those who faithfully serve the cause for profit. We stand at the opposite poles. You mentioned Ford. Of course he is a capable organizer of product, but don't you know his attitude towards the working class? Don't you know how many workers he throws on the streets? The capitalist is riveted to profit, and no power on earth can tear them away from it. Capitalism will be abolished, not by organizers of production, not by technical intelligentsia, but by the working class, because the aforementioned strata do not play an independent role. The engineer, the organizer of production, does not work as he would like to, but as he is ordered, in such a way as to serve the interest of his employers. There are exceptions, of course. There are people in this stratum who have awakened from the intoxication of capitalism. The technical intelligentsia can, under certain conditions, perform miracles greatly benefit mankind, but it can also cause great harm. We Soviet people have not a little experience on technical intelligentsia. After the October Revolution, a certain section of technical intelligentsia refused to take part in the work in constructing a new society. They opposed this work of construction and sabotaged it. We did all we possibly could to bring the technical intelligentsia into work of construction. We tried this way and that. Not a little time passed before our technical intelligentsia agreed to actively assist the new system. Today, the best section of this technical intelligentsia are from the front rank of the builders of a socialist society. Having this experience, we are far from understanding the good and the bad sides of the technical intelligentsia. And we know that on the one hand it can do harm, and on the other hand it can perform miracles. Of course, one thing would be different if it were possible at one stroke spiritually to tear down technical intelligentsia away from the capitalist world. But that is utopia. Are there many of the technical intelligentsia who would not dare break away from the bourgeois world and set to work reconstructing society? Do you think there are not many people in this kind, say, in England or in France? No. There are few who would be willing to break from their employers to begin reconstructing the world. Besides, we can lose sight of the fact that in order to transform the world, it is necessary to have political power, right? It seems to me, Mr. Wells, that you greatly underestimate the question of political power, that it entirely drops out of your conception. What can those, even with the best intentions in the world, do if they are unable to raise the question of seizing power and do not possess power? At best, they can help the class which takes power, but they cannot change the world themselves. This can only be done by a great class which can take the place of the capitalist class and become the sovereign master of the latter was before. This class is the working class. Of course, the assistance of the technical intelligentsia must be accepted. The latter, in turn, must be assisted, but it must not be thought that the technical intelligentsia can play an independent historical role. Transformation of this world is great, complicated, and painful process. For this task, a great class is required. Big ships go on long voyages. Wells: yes, but for long voyages, captain and navigator are required. Yes, as Mao said, sailing the seas depends on the helmsman. He said that long before you did, fucking idiot. Stalin replies, that is true. But what is first required for long voyages is a big ship. What is a navigator without a ship? An idle man. The big ship is humanity, not a class, says Wells. Stalin: you, Mr. Wells, evidently start out with the assumption that all men are good. I, however, do not forget that there are many wicked men. I do not believe in the goodness of the bourgeoisie. Wells: I remember the situation in regard to the technical intelligentsia several decades ago. At this time, the technical intelligentsia was numerically small, but there was much to do, and every engineer, technician, and intellectual found his opportunity. That is why the technical intelligentsia was the least revolutionary class. Now, however, there is a superabundance of technical intellectuals, and their mentality has changed very sharply. The skilled man who would formerly never listened to revolutionary talk is now greatly interested in it. Recently, I was dining with Royal Society. Royal Society. How can a Royal Society be revolutionary? Our great English Scientific Society. The president's speech was a speech for social planning and scientific control. 30 years ago, they would not have listened to what I say to them now. Today, the man at the head of the Royal Society holds revolutionary views and insists on the scientific reorganization of society. Mentality changes. Class war propaganda has not kept pace with these facts. He's so ignorant on dialectical materialism. Stalin: yes, I know this is to be explained by the fact that the capitalist society is now a cul-de-sac. The capitalists are seeking but cannot find a way to outdo this cul-de-sac that would be compatible with the dignity of this class, compatible with the interests of this class. They could to some extent crawl out of the crisis on their hands and knees, but they cannot find an exit that would enable them to walk out with head raised high, a way that would not fundamentally disturb the interest of capitalism. This, of course, is realized by wide circles of the technical intelligentsia. A large section of it is being realized to the community of its interests with those class which is capable of pointing the way out of the cul-de-sac, also known as the working class. Wells, you of all people know something about revolutions, Mr. Stalin. Mr. Stalin, from the practical side, do the masses ever rise? Is it not an established truth that all revolutions are by a minority? Stalin replies, to bring a revolution, a leading revolutionary minority is required, but the most talented, devoted, energetic minority would be helpless if it did not rely on at least passive support of millions, or the masses, I would say. Wells replies, at least passive, perhaps subconscious. Stalin replies, partly so. The semi-instinctive, semi-consciousness, but without the support of millions, the best minority is impotent. Wells, I watch communist propaganda in the West, and it seems to me that modern conditions of propaganda sound very old-fashioned because of its insurrectionary propaganda. Propaganda in the favor of violent overthrow of the social system was all very well when it was directed against tyranny, but under modern conditions, the system collapsing anyhow stress must lay on efficiency, on competence, on productiveness, not on insurrections. It seems an insurrectionary note is obsolete. The communist propaganda in the West is a nuisance to constructive-minded people. Not to mention, after he said this, the revolutions in China, Eastern Europe, revolutions in Africa, revolutions in Nepal, socialist revolutions in Laos and Vietnam and Korea had all taken place after this. Violent ones. What a fool. The communist propaganda in the West is a nuisance to constructive-minded people, says Wells. Stalin. Of course the old system is breaking down and decaying. That is true. But it is also true that new efforts are being made by other methods, by every means to save dying systems. You draw wrong conclusions from correct postulate. You rightly state that the old world is breaking down, but you're wrong in thinking that it is breaking down on its own accord. No. The substitution of one social system for another is a complicated and long revolutionary process. It is not simply a spontaneous process, but a struggle, class struggle. It is a process connected to the clash of classes. Capitalism is decaying, but there's not much to be compared simply with a tree which has decayed so much to the extent that it must fall to the ground of its own accord. No revolution, the substitution of one social system for another, has always been a struggle, a painful and cruel struggle, a life and death struggle. And every time the people of the New World came to power, they had to defend themselves against attempts of the Old World to restore old power by these forces. These people of the New World always had to be on alert. They had to be ready to repel the attacks of the Old World upon the new system. Yes, you are right when you say the old system is breaking down, but it is not breaking down of its own accord. Take fascism, for example. Fascism is a reactionary force which is trying to preserve the old system by means of violence. What will you do with fascists? Argue with them? Try to convince them? But this will have no effect upon them at all. Communists do not in the least idealized method of violence, but the communists do not want to be taken by surprise. They cannot count on the old world voluntarily departing from the stage. They see the old system is violently defending itself, and that is why communists say to the working class, answer violence with violence. Do all you can to prevent the old dying order from crushing you. Do not permit it to put manacles on your hands. Manacles on your hands, on the hands of which you will overthrow the old system. As you see, communists regard the substitution of one social system to another not simply as a spontaneous, peaceful process, but as a complicated, non-violent process. Communists cannot ignore facts. Wells, But look what is going on in the capitalist world. The collapse is not a simple one. It is the outbreak of reactionary violence, which is degenerating into gangsterism. And it seems to me that it comes to conflict with the reactionary and unintelligent violence. Socialists can appeal to law. So instead of regarding the police as an enemy, they should support them and fight against the reactionaries. I think it's useless operating the messes the old insurrectionary socialism. Stalin. The communists base themselves on rich historical experience, which teaches that obsolete classes do not voluntarily abandon the stage of history. Recall the history of England in the 17th century. Did not many say that the old social system had decayed? But it did not. Nevertheless, require Cromwell to crush it by force. Cromwell acted on the basis of the Constitution in the name of constitutional order. Stalin. In the name of the Constitution, he resorted to violence, beheaded the king, dispersed the parliament, arrested some, and beheaded others. Or take example our history. It was not clear for a long time that the Tsarist system was decaying. Was it not clear for a long time that the Tsarist system was decaying and breaking down? But how much blood to be shed to overthrow it? And what about the October Revolution? Were there not plenty of people who knew that we alone, the Bolsheviks, were indicating the only correct way out? Was it not clear that Russian capitalism had decayed? But you know how great was the resistance, how much blood had shed in order to defend the October Revolution from all its enemy, internal and external. Or take France at the end of the 18th century, long before 1789. It was clear how rotten the royal power, the feudal system, was. But popular insurrection, a clash of clashes, could not be avoided. Why? Because classes which must abandon the stage of history are the last to become convicted and their role is ended. It is impossible to convince them of this. They think that the fissures of decaying edifice of the old order can be repaired and saved. That is why dying classes take to arms and resort to every means to save their existing ruling class. Wells. But there were not a few lawyers at the head of the great French Revolution. Stalin. Do you know the role of the intelligentsia in revolutionary movement? Was the Great French Revolution a lawyers' revolution and not a popular revolution which achieved victory by rousing vast masses of people against feudalism and the champion interests of the Third Estate? And did the lawyers amongst the leaders of the Great French Revolution act according to the laws of the old order? Did they not introduce new bourgeois revolutionary laws? The rich experience of the history teaches us up to now a single class has voluntarily made its way from another class. There is no such precedent in world history. The communists have learned this lesson of history. Communists would welcome the voluntary departure of the bourgeoisie, but such a turn of affairs is improbable, and that is what experience teaches. That is why the communists want to be prepared for the worst and call upon the working class to be vigilant and prepared for battle. Who wants a captain who lulls the vigilance of his army? A captain who does not understand the enemy will not surrender, that he must be crushed. To be such a captain means deceiving, betraying the working class. That is why I think it seems that you to be old-fashioned in the fact of a measure. That is why I think that what seems to you to be old-fashioned is in fact a measure of revolutionary expediency for the working class. Wells. I do not deny force has to be used, but I think forms of the struggle should fit closely as possible to opportunities presented by existing laws, which must be defended against reactionary attacks. There is no need to disorganize the old system because it is disorganizing itself as it is. That is why it seems to me insurrection against the old order, against the law, is obsolete, old-fashioned. Incidentally, I deliberately exaggerate in order to bring the truth out more clearly. I can formulate my point of view in the following way. First, for order. Second, I attack the present system so far as I can assure order. Third, I think class war propaganda may detach socialism from those who are educated, from people, just those educated people whom socialism needs. This person doesn't understand this. I keep saying it, I'm sorry. Stalin. In order to achieve a great object, an important social object, there must be a main force, a bulwark, a revolutionary class. Next, it is necessary to organize the assistance of an auxiliary force for this main force. In this case, the auxiliary force is the party, to which best forces the best forces of intelligentsia belong. Just now you spoke about educated people, but what educated people did you have in mind? Were there not plenty of educated people at the side of the old order in England in the 17th century, in France, and at the end of the 18th century, and in Russia in the epoch of the October Revolution? The old order had its service mainly highly educated people who defended the old order, who opposed the new order. Education is a weapon, the effects of which are determined by the hands which wield it, by who is to be struck down. Of course, the proletariat, socialism, needs highly educated people. Clearly, simpletons cannot help the proletariat fight for socialism to build a new society. I do not underestimate the role of the intelligentsia. On the contrary, I emphasize it. The question is, however, which intelligentsia are we discussing? Because there are different kinds of intelligentsia. There can be no revolution without radical change in the educational system. It is sufficient to quote two examples. The example of the German Republic, which did not touch the old educational system, therefore never became a republic, and the example of the British Labour Party, which lacks the determination of radical change on the educational system. That is, Stalin says, that is a correct observation. Yeah, that is one of the few things he has observed properly. Stalin continues to say, permit me to reply to your 3 points. First, the main thing for the revolution is the existence of social bulwark. This bulwark of the revolution is the working class. Second, an auxiliary force is required that is called the Communist Party. The party belongs to intelligent workers whose element of technical intelligentsia, which are closely connected to the working class. Intelligentsia can be strong only if it combines with the working class. If it opposes the working class, it becomes a cipher. Third, political power is required as a lever for change. The new political power creates new laws. New order, which is revolutionary order. I do not stand for any kind of order. I stand for an order that corresponds to the interests of the working class. If, however, any of the laws of the old order can be utilized in the interest of the struggle for the new order, the old laws should be utilized. I cannot object to your postulate that the present system should be attacked, and so far it does not ensure the necessary order of the people. And finally, you're wrong if you think that communists are enamored of violence. They would be very pleased to drop violent methods if the ruling class agreed to give away the working class. But experience of history speaks against such assumptions. Wells. There was a case in history of England, however, a class voluntarily handing over power to another class. In a period between 1830 and 1870, the aristocracy, whose influence was still very considerable at the end of the 18th century, voluntarily, without severe struggle, surrendered power to the bourgeoisie, which serves as a sentimental support of the monarchy. Subsequently, the transference of power led to the establishment of the ruling oligarchy. Stalin. But you have imperceptibly passed from questions of revolution to questions of reform. This is not the same thing. Don't you think that Chartist movement played a great role in the reformists in England? Wells. The Charterists did little and disappeared without leaving a trace. Stalin. I do not agree with you. The Charterists and the strike movement which they organized played a great role. They compelled the ruling class to make a number of concessions regarding the franchise in regard to abolishing the so-called rotten boroughs. In regard to some of the Charterism played a not important historical role, compelled by a section of the ruling class to make certain concessions, reforms in order to avert great shock. Generally speaking, it must be said that of all the ruling classes of England, both aristocracy and bourgeoisie proved to be the cleverest, most flexible, and point of view of class interest, from the point of view maintaining their power. Take this example, say, from modern history. The general strike of England in 25-26. The first thing the other bourgeoisie would have done in the face of such events when the General Council of Trade Unions called for a strike would have been to arrest trade union leaders. The British bourgeoisie did not do that. It acted cleverly from the point of view of its own interests. It cannot conceive such a flexible strategy being employed by the bourgeoisie in the United States, France, or Germany. In order to maintain their rule, the ruling classes of Great Britain have forsworn small concessions, reforms, but it would be a mistake to think these reforms were revolutionary. Before I continue, sorry about the car noise. Wells, you have a higher opinion of the ruling classes of my country than I have, but there is a great difference between a small revolution and great reform. Is not a reform a small revolution? Stalin. Owing pressure from below, the pressure of the masses, the bourgeoisie may sometimes concede certain partial reforms while remaining the basis of existing social economic system. Acting in this way, it calculates these concessions. It calculates that these concessions are necessary in order to preserve its class role. In essence, reform. This is the essence of reform. Revolution, however, means the transference of power from one class to another. That is why it is impossible to describe any reform as revolution. That is why we cannot count the change of social systems taking place as an imperceptible transition from one system to another by means of reforms, by the ruling class making concessions. Wells, I am very grateful for this talk, which meant a great deal to me. In explaining things to me, you probably called in mind how you had to explain the fundamentals of socialism and illegal circles before the revolution. At the present time, there are only two persons whose opinion, to whose every word millions are listening, you and Roosevelt. Others may preach as much as they like. What they say will never be printed or heeded. I cannot yet appreciate what has been done in your country. I only arrived yesterday. I have already seen happy faces of healthy men and women, and I know something very considerable is being done here. In contrast, the contrast to 1920 is astounding. Remember, this is 17 years after 1920 during the Civil War. Stalin replies, much more could have been done had we Bolsheviks been clever. Wells, no, if human beings were clever, it would have been a good thing to invent a 5-year plan for the reconstruction of the human brain, which obviously lacks many things needed for a perfect social order. There's mutual laughter there. Don't you intend to stay for the Congress of the Writers' Union? Stalin says. Wells, unfortunately, I have various engagements to fulfill, and I can stay in the USSR only for a week. I came to see you, and I am very satisfied by our talk, but I intend to discuss such Soviet writers as I can meet the possibility of affiliating the Pen Club. This is an international organization of writers founded by Galsworthy. After his death, I became president. The organization is still weak, but it branches in many countries, and and what is more important, the speeches of its members are widely reported even in the press. It insists upon free expression and opinion, even of the opposition opinion. I hope to discuss this point with Gorky. Love Gorky. I do not know if you are prepared yet for such freedom here. Stalin. We Bolsheviks call it self-criticism. It is widely used in the USSR. Is there anything I can help you? I shall be glad to do so. Wells expresses thanks. Stalin expresses thanks for the visit. Fini. Thank you for watching, Solidarity Comrades. Have a good one.